Hello and welcome back to Ready Steady DIY. Well, if you saw last week's episode, you probably knew this one was coming. Last week I did a review of the IKEA Trones shoe cabinet, I mounted it on a wall, and I used a stud finder to do that. So today we're going to do a review of that stud finder. The stud finder in question is the Prosensor 710 Plus from Franklin Sensors. Today I'm going to go over a couple of things, put it through a test, see how it does through 1 layer, then 2 layers, then 3 layers of drywall. And in the end, I found something that I was not expecting. So make sure to stick around to the end. And hey, if there's any way you could like or subscribe, if you do like, that would be awesome. We got a lot to do today, so let's get to it. So for those of you who are kind of new to stud sensors, or studs in general, essentially anytime you're attaching anything to a wall, be it a shelf, a mirror, a television set, a bathroom cabinet, whatever it is you're mounting on that wall, it's going to mount much more securely if you connect it directly to the studs that are behind the drywall that together comprise your wall. Studs typically are 2x4s or 2x6s, and generally, as we discussed in the previous video, they are often spaced at 16 inches apart in your wall. This is why tape measures have 16-inch measurements marked on them in red. Basically, if you know your studs are spaced 16 inches apart and you can find one, typically, you can find the rest in the wall. There will be variants. Sometimes they're spaced at 24 inches. Sometimes they're just spaced poorly. You gotta be careful, but a stud finder is one excellent method to make sure you've actually found the stud, know where its center is, and when you're mounting, you mount to it correctly. Stud finders have been with us for a long time. Needing to find a stud is something that everybody eventually encounters. The problem with a lot of stud finders is they're just not reliable. If you look at online reviews, you will find that there are many people who are frustrated with their stud finder. Contrarily, if you look at online reviews, you will find that there are many people who are pretty happy with the Franklin 710 Plus. I noticed this and I thought, I should give that a try. So the Prosensor 710 Plus from Franklin Sensors has a 7-inch wide LED display. It has 13 sensors that are separate and built into it, which at the time of its creation really set it apart from other stud sensors. That's a lot of sensors, way more sensors than a conventional stud finder. They advertise on the front of the box that the Prosensor 710 has a maximum detection depth of 1.6 inches. This is pretty important. 2 layers of 3/4 inch drywall is 1.5 inches. If you can detect a stud that's 1.6 inches deep, that's a pretty handy thing. So today I'm going to go over some of the features of the Prosensor 710, and then I'm going to test it. We're going to try it through a single 1/2-inch piece of drywall and see how it does. Then I'm going to add a second 1/2-inch piece of drywall, and then I'm going to add a third. We'll see how it does at 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and 1.5 inches deep. So to start out, I contacted the company and I asked them, is there anything new or different or special about your sensors that makes them different from other companies' sensors? Or are they basically the same sensors, there's just more of them? Franklin Sensors' response did not include an answer to that. So I don't know. What I can say is that my experience with the stud finder is generally positive. I, like most people who review it, find it to be pretty reliable. You'll see in the tests that I do where it has shortcomings, where it stops being reliable. But generally speaking, I like owning this product. If you're gonna be a homeowner, you're gonna hang stuff on your walls, if you're gonna do DIY stuff, eventually you're gonna need to find a stud somewhere. I'm not a framing expert, but in my experience, having tried a few of the stud finders that are on the market, I find the Franklin 710 Plus to really work. I trust it, not implicitly, but I do trust it, and I'll show you why. The Franklin 710 Plus is pretty easy to use. You load it up with 2 AA batteries, which is something a lot of people will like. Many stud sensors work on the 9-volt battery system. Not a lot of people have rechargeable 9 volts, and they're more expensive and harder to find. 2 AA's, most people have that. There's one button. You basically take the surface of the sensor, which has little Teflon pads that allow it to glide along the wall. You apply it to the wall, you hit the button, and it'll tell you if there's something behind the drywall, hopefully a stud. The LEDs light up over the full width of whatever it's detecting behind the wall. So you'll be able to see where the stud starts, where the stud ends, and you'll be able to infer the middle. Obviously the middle is pretty important. That's where you want to screw. So like most people on YouTube who are reviewing stud sensors, I made a little wall and I put a few studs at differing distances. So I put up a single stud, I put up a double stud, and I put up 2 studs that are separated by the width of 1 stud. What I'm gonna do is test the stud sensor in all 3 of those scenarios at 1 layer of 1/2-inch drywall, and then I'm gonna do it again after I add a second layer of drywall, and then I'm gonna add a third layer of drywall. to see how thick a wall the sensor can read through. So if you watch the previous video, you'll see something kind of interesting. You'll see that the stud sensor was able to locate the studs in the wall through the drywall, but then it was also able to locate the studs in the wall accurately through the plastic cabinet I was mounting to the wall as well as the drywall. That got me to thinking, if it can manage that, I wonder how many layers of drywall it can actually see through. On the box, they mention a maximum depth detection of 1.6 inches. So I'm kind of hoping that if I apply 3 layers of half-inch drywall to one another, that the Franklin 710 Plus can handle it. So I'm going to try. So as you can see here, it doesn't really matter. You can start with the sensor engaged on the wall, or you can hit the button before you touch the wall. It doesn't matter to the sensor at all. It'll read whatever. There's no calibration process. It's pretty easy. Just one button and go. So gliding along, the sensor finds the single stud, no problem. It'll show you where it starts and ends. And as you glide the sensor up and down, side to side, it doesn't lose the stud. So I'm pretty confident there's a stud there. So on to the other side where there's a double stud. Does that fool the sensor? No. It definitely sees that there's a double stud there. If you know that the studs in the wall are 2x4s and hence 1.5 inches wide, then you'll be able to see that you got 3 inches here, and you'll be able to intuit that there's a double stud. And so when you're mounting, you're going to want to be really careful not to put your nail or your screw right down the middle. It'll just get sandwiched in there. It won't bite into the wood the way it would if you found the middle of one of the studs. So that's pretty handy. Over to the stud section of my little fake wall, and it finds it again. It doesn't seem, at least with one layer of drywall, to get confused by the stud or the space. It finds both studs, and it lets you know where there isn't a stud too. So that's pretty good. Single layer of half-inch drywall, complete pass. So now I'm going to add a layer of half-inch drywall and see if it does just as well. And the stud sensor is performing pretty well on the single stud and the double stud. It's having a little hesitation on the stud, but it's still generally finding those two. It's also letting me know where there isn't a stud. It's just a little bit of hesitation. I think I'm starting to bother the sensor. So the question is, can I add a 3rd layer of drywall, and will this still work? You probably wouldn't find 3 layers of drywall in your home, but I did want to know if the sensor could work through it. They do say that it can work up to 1.6 inches deep, and this is only 1.5 inches. The drywall's new, the drywall's dry. I was just curious if it would work. As you can see, it does not work. The 3 layers of drywall has totally baffled the Franklin 710 Plus. It's finding the double stud, but it's reading it as a single stud, and it's not really finding the center form. It's not finding the stud at all, and it's missing the single stud too. So I gotta say, not gonna work at 1.5 inches, but 1 inch thick of drywall, no problem. The drywall in my house is 3/4 inches thick. That's pretty common. I would say for most applications for a DIY person or a homeowner, the Franklin 710 Plus is a pretty good choice. Probably the company's claims about it being more accurate than other stud sensors are true. I think it's probably a worthwhile purchase. It certainly costs more, but I think it's worth it. It doesn't mean it's going to work through any surface. Obviously, I've been able to fool it with 1.5 inches thick of drywall. There's probably other stuff too that it won't be able to read through. One more serious thing I found with the 710 Plus happened when I decided to add a piece of 1.5 inch Schedule 40 aluminum pipe to the mix. Since it has a very different density than the wood of the studs, the sensor focuses on the pipe and loses the double stud. Remove the pipe, it sees the double stud again. Obviously, a sensor that works on density can get fooled by objects of different density. And that is a real challenge, given that there can be so much more than just studs in your wall. Pipe, electrical, and you don't want to accidentally drill into that. But having said that, all in all, I think this is a pretty good sensor. To me, this stud sensor works like how everybody expects a stud sensor to work, and the limitations with it are reasonable. So buying it, probably a good idea. Anyway, I hope that helped you out. If it did, please feel free to like or subscribe. That would really help the channel out. And if not, please leave a comment. Like I say every week, comments help me make the channel better, and that's what I'm after. Until next week, happy stud sensing.